Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something as dreamy as it is deadly. Romance in the Middle Ages. But before you imagine candlelit halls and roses at dawn, let me be real with you. Falling in love back then wasn't just dramatic. It was downright dangerous. Like you probably won't survive this kind of dangerous. We're talking scandal, sword fights, prison, and even executions. All for a little kiss or secret note passed under a chapel pew. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for its soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in a world where love isn't a fairy tale. It's a minefield. It's the early 12th century. The Middle Ages are still trudging through mud-stained boots and ironclad morality, and you're growing up in a world where everyone already knows you. You're going to marry by the time you can barely spell your own name. Not because of compatibility or butterflies, but because your family made a deal, usually involving land, alliances, or livestock. So, love that's not on the official menu, but here's the twist. Despite all the practicality and pressure, people still fall in love, like deep, heart-wrenching, bad decision-making kind of love. And that tension between the real and the romantic births one of the most iconic and misunderstood cultural phenomena of the era, courtly love. Now, imagine this. You're a noble woman. You're technically married, sure, but your husband is always off at war or just disinterested in anything that isn't hunting bow. One day, a young knight, maybe a bit too poetic for his own good, comes around singing about your hair and how your smile could conquer dragons. He leaves little poems with suspicious La Familia metaphors. He catches your eye at the feast and raises his goblet in your direction. You pretend not to notice, but you totally do. That's courtly love. It's all about admiration, longing, and supposedly unconsummated affection. The ideal was pure and noble. He worships you from afar, writes songs about your beauty, swears fealty to your favor in battle. It's like emotional yoga. All the stretching, none of the action. The whole thing is supposed to stay platonic. But let's be honest, sometimes it didn't. Here's where it gets spicy. These little romantic games weren't just risky. They could literally kill you. You see, most marriages were contracts. Breaching them, especially if you're a woman, meant shame, legal action, or death. Even just entertaining the idea of someone else, even in poetry, could be taken as proof of adultery. And that's not a charge people took lightly. Meanwhile, treaters, the medieval equivalent of TikTok sad boys, court to court, singing songs about tragic longing and the noble pain of forbidden love. Their songs were the Eros rom-coms, except they usually ended with the knight dead in a ditch or the lady banished to a convent. Still, the whole thing caught on, especially in places like southern France and northern Italy. Young nobles started believing in the idea that love was supposed to hurt, that suffering for someone out of reach was the highest emotional achievement. You don't just love someone, you adore them, ache for them, compose an entire lute ballad about the way they're shot at dusk. This may sound poetic, but here's the problem. It messes with already precarious balance of power. In a society where every marriage is X's move, and every flirtation could destabilize years of diplomacy, love PTS dangerous, not just personally, but politically. If the Count's daughter falls for the blacksmith's apprentice, it's not a Hallmark movie. It's a scandal that could result in bloodshed. And don't get too cozy with the idea that men had it easier. They didn't. A young knight caught making eyes at the baron's wife could find himself on the wrong end of a lance or sent to a monastery faster than you can say. Unrequited. Love, in this age, is a high-stakes gamble where the odds are rigged and the house usually wins. One historical fact, The concept of courtly love really gained steam in Ela Lanner of Aquitaine's court, where poets and thinkers romanticized idealist action. Helena herself was married to 2 kings, and had a complicated love life that might have inspired half the drama in medieval poetry. She helped shape this cultural movement, but even in her high status, she wasn't immune to political blowback. At one point, she was imprisoned by her own husband, King Henry II, for allegedly encouraging their sons to rebel. Love and politics, never clean. Now, here's a fringe gem for you. Some medieval love manuals existed, actual guides on how to woo someone properly. One of the weirdest examples comes from Andreas Capellanus, The Art of Courtly Love, which includes bizarre advice like, love cannot exist in the married state, and outlines a very specific class-based approach to seduction. Picture a medieval self-help book, written by someone who clearly never had a healthy relationship. And of course, no good bedtime story is complete without a little historical debate. Scholars still argue whether courtly love was ever really practiced, or if it was all just a poetic fantasy. Some say it was a genuine code followed by the aristocracy. Others claim it was mostly literary make-believe, a kind of socialized acceptable way to talk about longing without ever admitting to scandal. Was it real? Was it just fan fiction of the nobility? The truth probably lives somewhere in between a rose garden and a locked tower. So here you are surrounded by castles and codes, navigating a world where falling in love isn't just emotionally risky. It's legally, socially, and physically dangerous. You've got songs being written about your eyes, rumors whispering through the halls, and a husband who might not take kindly to poetry involving your dimples. Sleep well knowing this. In the Middle Ages, Cupid didn't just carry arrows. He carried consequences. You're walking through the cloisteretals of a medieval castle, damp stone underfoot, and a draft that's always just cold enough to make you question your life choices. You're not royalty, yet you're welcomed enough to be in the thick of noble life. And tonight, someone's whispering about another scandal. One that's already got 2 maids dismissed, and a knight summoned at bear, the Lord himself. The charge, a secret liaison. Translation, forbidden love. Here's the hard truth. If you fall for someone you're not supposed to, it's not just frowned upon. It's dangerous, as in, your life could end painfully and publicly. Romantic relationships, outside of marriage, weren't just disapproved of. They were criminal affairs, especially among the noble class, could lead to charges of adultery, treason, or worse. And it didn't matter if it was mutual or not. Once the rumor mill got hold of affliction, the consequences started snowballing. Let's paint the picture. You're a young lady of the court, technically married to a man twice your age, chosen for you because of his property holdings. He's always away, or drunk, maybe both. Then there's the new squire, earnest, poetic, impossibly blue-eyed. You pass each other in the hall. One day he drops a glove. You pick it up and your fingers brush. The moment barely lasts a second, but someone sees. Now everything gets dangerous. The maid who spotted you, she's loyal to your husband. She whispers to the steward who tells the coplain, who tells the lady of the next estate during evening prayer. Within days, the whole castle knows. And in the Middle Ages, where surveillance was basically gossip with better acoustics, that's all it took to start any. Adultery wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a legal offense. If you're a woman caught in an affair, your husband could legally kill you. That's not melodrama. It's codified in several medieval law systems, including Anglo-Saxon and Frankish traditions. Men could also be punished, but their consequences were often lighter. For women, the stakes were existential. You weren't just cheating on your husband. You were endangering the family line, possibly birthing an heir that wasn't his. And in a society obsessed with bloodlines, that wasn't a clear-level betrayal. Of course, sometimes it wasn't the husband you had to worry about. If you were someone from another noble house, your love affair might look an awful lot like espionage. that could mean imprisonment in a tower, literal dungeon time, or death by execution. Remember Asab of Bavaria, Queen of France, accused of numerous affairs during her husband's mental illness. Some believe that rumors were politically motivated, but even unproven whispers nearly ruined her reign. No one was safe. Now, let's flip the coin. Say you're a knight, and you fall in love with the Lord's daughter. Theirs is a name you can't even speak without choking on your own ambition, but you do speak it. In fact, you write it in a poem that you slip into her psalter, very smooth. Except now her father knows, and he's not flattered. You're accused of dishonoring her, and since she's technically property, until married off, her honor reflects directly in his. If he's merciful, you're sent to fight in a war. If not, you're found hanging by dawn. Love can't compete with power, and it wasn't just the nobility playing these high-stakes games. Even among peasants and townsfolk, romantic scandals could turn ugly fast. In small communities, people lived on top of each other physically and socially. Everyone knew everyone's business. A miller's daughter sneaking into the woods with a shepherd. If caught, they could be publicly whipped, forced to confess in church. Village. Imagine standing barefoot for your parish priest while your neighbors hurl cabbage in judgment. So romantic. Here's a historical fact for your nightmares. In 1395, Marjorie of Hereford was accused of adultery after a neighbor claimed to see a man leave her cottage late at night. Her punishment: she was forced to stand outside the church in a sackcloth dress while the priest read her sins aloud. And that was a mild sentence. Others were branded, mutilated, or worse. But don't get the idea that all this was always about justice. Sometimes accusations were strategic. If a lord wanted to dispose of an inconvenient wife, or an ambitious rival, a whispered allegation of a romantic indiscretion could be a use. Love became weaponized, twisted into a political dagger. The bedroom wasn't private. It was a battlefield. Now, for your quirky tidbit, some medieval towns held love courts. Yes, real ones. They didn't dole out legal sentences, but noble women would gather to judge cases of romantic suffering. Think of it as aristocratic group therapy mixed with a fanfic forum. These courts would decide whether a knight's love was true or whether a lady had been cruel in rejecting him. Totally dramatic, totally non-binding, and totally unable to protect anyone from real-world consequences. Of course, modern scholars still argue about how common these lethal outcomes were. Did people really die that often for love? Or are we just obsessed with the juicy outliers? Some historians say that actual executions for affairs were rare and exaggerated in court literature. Others argue they were more common but underreported, especially for lower-risk offenders. Either way, the cultural fear of punishment was real. And in the Middle Ages, fear was half the law. So here you are in love, and surrounded by land deals, legal traps, and jealous whispers. You write a note, you sneak a kiss, you dream of a life you can't have. But in this world, even a whisper of affection can cost you everything. Is it worth it? That's the question medieval lovers had to ask themselves every day. And often they answered yes. Even when it meant ruin. You wake up to the sound of clanging iron. Someone's forging horseshoes outside your window. It's a reminder that even love has to make way for business here. You live in a world where marriages aren't rooted in passion, romance, or even basic compatibility. Nope. In the Middle Ages, marriage is a transaction, a financial merger, a carefully calculated political strategy wrapped in a church ceremony and a low-taff fabric. Whether you're born to a noble family or a modest farming household, your love life is already mapped out long before you're old enough to feel anything resembling infatuation. Your parents don't sit you down with a cup of tea and ask how you feel about the kid down the road. Instead, they negotiate your future like a merchant haggling over a barrel of salted fish. Dowries are discussed. Land is weighed. Political alliances are drawn up. The goal isn't happiness. It's survival, stability, influence, love. That's an optional side quest, and a dangerous one at that. Picture this. You're a young nobleman, maybe 16, and you've just been told you're to marry a girl from a powerful neighboring family. You've met her exactly once. She was 10 at the time, and very concerned about her pet hawk. You're expected to wed her. When she turns 12 or 13, which is perfectly normal by medieval standards, the union will secure access to her family's vineyards, ensuring a steady wine supply and a stronger military alliance. You didn't get a say. If you protest, you're told to think of the family legacy. Love is for songs, not strategy. Meanwhile, if you're the bride, things aren't any better. You're being handed over like a diplomatic token. Your education has focused more on managing a household and surviving childbirth than on poetry or dreams. The wedding night isn't about romance. It's about consummation. Because until that's done, the marriage isn't considered legal, and if it isn't consummated, both families could call the whole thing off, which would bring shame, debts, and possibly open conflict. So, you play your role. You smile at the feast. You wear the heavy gown. You endure theatoast and the stairs. And inside maybe you're aching for someone else, someone your heart picked, not your parents. That's the cruel paradox of the Middle Ages. Marriage is everywhere, but love is usually somewhere else. People get married to survive and fall in love in spite of it. It's almost expected that if you do feel something real, it'll happen outside your marriage, which again makes things very, very complicated. Historically, this dynamic left room for all kinds of quiet rebellion, secret lovers, emotional affairs, longing glances during banquets. People found ways to feel something real in the cracks between duty and expectation. Of course, some took it a step further, trying to annul their arranged marriages to pursue love elsewhere. But here's where things get spicy and sad. Getting an annulment wasn't like clicking unsubscribe. It was a grueling legal and spiritual process overseen by the church, often requiring you to prove that your marriage was invalid from thestart reasons. Included impotence? Yes, you had to prove that in public. Consanguinity, being too closely related, which, let's be honest, was common among nobles, or coercion. But church wasn't exactly eager to unravel alliances forged through holy matrimony. If your union benefited powerful families or political factions, your pleas fell on deaf ears. More than once, people trying to escape loveless marriages were accused of heresy or excommunicated altogether. Here's a historical gem. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Yes, her again actually had her first marriage, to Louis VI, annulled on grounds of consanguinity. But everyone suspected the real reason was that she just couldn't stand him, and had her eye on Henry of Anjou, soon to be Henry II of England. It worked out for her sort of. But even queens had to bend rules and risk scandal to follow their hearts. But let's not forget the commoners. Among peasants, things were a little looser, but not by much. Marriages were still arranged, often by fathers and village elders, and economy considerations were front and center. A good match wasn't about chemistry. It was about cows or land, or sometimes just proximity. You might get lucky and actually like your spouse, but if you didn't, tough. Divorce wasn't an option, and if you were caught straying, the punishments could be brutal, especially if you were a woman. Here's a quirky nugget. Some regions had rituals that mocked failed or loveless marriages. In parts of France, if a couple didn't consummate their marriage within a certain time, villagers would gather outside their home and bang pots and pans, and obnoxious, very public shaming. It was called charivari, and it was the medieval version of getting roasted by your neighbors for being a disappointment. And just because love wasn't officially part of marriage, doesn't mean people didn't crave it. You'd find it in songs, in the Margansef illuminated manuscripts, in the careful stitching of a lover's initials into a handkerchief. People still wanted to love and be loved. They just didn't have the institutional support for it. If anything, the danger and impossibility made love feel even more urgent, more desperate, like you had to seize it quickly before the world took it away. One scholarly debate that still floats around like smoke in a candlelit hall. Were people really as emotionally detached from marriage as the documents suggest? Some researchers argue that we've overestimated the coldness of arranged unions, that affection, companionship, even love could grow over time. Others say that's wishful thinking and the system was fundamentally hostile to romance from the start. Maybe both are true. Maybe it depended on the people, the place, the luck. So here you are, either promised to someone you don't love, or already shackled to them, watching the world pass by through a lattice window. You hear laughter from the stables, or catch the scent of rosemary on someone's tunic, and your heart stirs, in spite of everything. You think about what it might be like to choose freely. But in the Middle Ages, love is rarely free. It's priced in land, bloodlines, and obedience. And when it shows up uninvited, it often gets punished. You know who's always watching? The church. Like always, eyes in the choir loft, ears in the confession booth, hands in the parchment drawers. In the Middle Ages, falling in love wasn't just socially risky, it was spiritually dangerous. The church saw desire as a loaded crossbow pointed straight at the soul, and they made sure everyone, especially you, understood the consequences. Let's be clear, medieval Christianity had a complex love-hate relationship with love. On the one hand, divine love was sacred, God's love, beautiful. The Virgin Mary's compassion, glorious, but romantic love, especially the messy, lusty kind that makes people do stupid things in gardens at midnight. That was a one-way ticket to hell, unless carefully contained inside marriage, properly blessed, and thoroughly guilt-ridden. If you're lucky, or unlucky enough, to be educated in a monastic school, you're taught early on that the body is a vessel of temptation, the flesh weak, the heart deceitful. You're warned through parables, sermons, and stained glass windows that desire can ruin not just your life, but your afterlife. And yet, ironically, some oft most beautifully romantic writing of the time comes from monks and nuns wrestling with their own desires. Goffagir, by the 12th century. The church is tightening its grip on marriage and love with iron tongs. Before that, marriage was more of a community thing. Familiars made deals and the local lord might witness it, maybe with a priest on standby. But now, the church wants full control. No more backyard vows or secret pact sunder. The harvest moon. Fro. 1215, on with the Fourth Lateran Council. Marriage becomes a sacrament. That means you need a priest and public witnesses. Secret marriages, not just frowned upon, nullified. Your whispers in the chapel don't count, unless the church says so. And don't think for a second that feelings matter. The church isn't interested in your butterflies. They care about legitimacy of children, off-land claims, of inheritances. Love is suspect unless it's disciplined by ritual and sealed with a sermon. Want to marry for love? Well, you'd better be ready to prove that your desire aligns with God's will. Otherwise, it's fornication, and fornication is sin. Sin needs confession or punishment. Now, let's talk about sex. Because you literally couldn't talk about love in the Middle Ages without opening that can of worms and then immediately being told to feel guilty about it. According to church doctrine, sex was only acceptable inside marriage, and even then, it had to be for procreation. Doing it for pleasure, that was a slippery slope toward damnation. Some theologians even went so far as to specify acceptable positions. Spoiler, if it sounded fun, it probably wasn't on the list. And yet, people kept doing it. Shocking, right? Despite fire and brimstone, sermons, people fell in love, snuck into barns, and found ways to touch the untouchable. And when they got caught, oh boy, the punishments could be spiritual, social, or downright physical. A priest might sentence you to public penance, standing outside church in A shift, ash on your head, tears on your face. You might be barred from communion, excommunicated, or worse, dragged into an ecclesiastical trial and paraded as a cautionary tale. Take the case of Pira Biller and Eloise. He's a philosopher and teacher. She's his brilliant young student. They fall in love, and the result is a medieval scandal, so intense, it still gets analyzed in gender studies classes today. Their secret affair leads to a secret child, a secret marriage, and finally, a not-so-secret act of violent revenge. Abelard is castrated by Hello's furious uncle and a few hired thugs. He retreats into monkhood. She becomes a nun. They spend the rest of their lives writing each other heartbreakingly articulate letters, overflowing with longing, philosophy, and regret. If no one ever doubted the danger of medieval love, that story pretty much seals it. Now, here's something weird. Despite all the church's rules, love still snuck in through the side door in prayers, in mystical experiences, in the language of devotion. Some saints describe their relationship with God using the same imagery found in Roman antiquity. They blushed, they wept, they longed for union. Not in the carnal sense, of course, but still, the vocabulary got suspiciously steamy. The lines between spiritual ecstasy and romantic yearning weren't always as clear as the bishops would have liked. And then there's confession. Oh, confession. The medieval version of airing your dirty laundry to someone with total power over your eternal fate. If you confessed impure thoughts or deeds, you might be forgiven if you were truly repentant. But you'd also be marked, especially if you were a woman. Female sexuality was viewed as doubly dangerous, capable of tempting men and representing moral weakness. If a man fell into sin, it was often blamed on a woman who led him astray. So yes, love wasn't just dangerous, it was frequently weaponized against women. Some fringe beliefs pushed this even further. There were sects eventually labeled heretical, that believed love itself could be a path to divine truth. The Catos, for instance, rejected the material world entirely, including traditional marriage, and believed spiritual love transcended physical bonds. The church didn't like that one bit. Cathars were hunted down, excommunicated, and in many cases burned. Not metaphorically, actually burned. And of course, historians still debate whether the church's messaging really sank in. Did regular folks internalize all that fire and brimstone, or did they just nod along and then go home to their actual feelings? Some scholars argue that the average medieval villager lived a double life, outwardly devout, inwardly human. Others insist that fear of damnation genuinely shaped their emotional choices, keeping people from even considering certain relationships. Hard to know. Medieval diaries weren't exactly candid. So, here you are again, caught in a web spun from scripture and shame. Maybe you've just realized you're in love with the local Reeves' daughter. You see her once a week at Mass. Eyes lowered, hair veiled. You feel something stir that no sermon can quiet. But acting on it means risking not just your social standing, but your soul. Lovent, a blessing here. It's a battleground. And the church, it's the referee, the rule book, and the executioner. Aelin 1. You're adjusting the weight of a velvet headpiece that somehow feels like it was designed by Simona Hood. Never worn one. The servants are murmuring in the hallway. The sun's casting long shadows through your stained glass window, and your heart is racing. Not because of your duties, or your dress, or the dozen eyes watching your every move, but because someone just left a lily on your windowsill. It wasn't your husband. A fure, a noblewoman in the Middle Ages. Falling in love is like dancing blindfolded on a frozen pond. It's thrilling, and sure, there's a chance you'll make it through unscathed, but odds are, you're going to fall through ice, and the water below is icy, bitter, and filled with consequences. Noble women walk a tightrope between being admired and being condemned. You're supposed to be beautiful, desirable, inspiring, but only in ways that don't lead to anything real. Courtly love rules say you can be adored from afar, written about in ballads, and honored in tournaments. But the moment admiration turns to action, that's when the entire house of cards collapses. And yet you want more. Not just admiration, not just bows from suitors and polite smiles at banquets. You want to be known, touched, whispered to. And so, like many before you, you test the waters. Maybe you let the night linger a moment too long in your chambers. Maybe your eyes meet across the feasting table one too many times. It's small, harmless even, but this is the Middle Ages where harmless is just danger dressed in pearls. Take the story of Queen Isabella of France. She was married to King Edward II, who, let's just say, was ataxically attentive in the way a medieval king was expected to be. Rumors flew about his preferences and favoritist word, his male companions. Isabella, after years of humiliation, found solace in a man named Roger Mortimer. Their affair wasn't just scandalous, it was political dynamite. Eventually, they led a rebellion against Edward, had him deposed, and possibly murdered. A love affair that literally toppled a king. That's not poetry, that's history. But for most noble women, things don't end with rebellion and regency. They end with banishment, forced confessions, and if you're lucky, confinement to a convent. If you're not lucky, public execution, burning, stoning. Honor killings weren't just a thing they happened in the castles of Europe, dressed up in respectability and justice. What makes this all worse is that noble women are constantly watched. You have ladies in waiting, guards, attendants, and even nuns looking over your shoulder. Privacy is non-existent. Your letters are intercepted. Your messengers are bribed. Your secrets slaked before you can say, "This never happened." And when suspicion arises, your body becomes evidence. Midwives and clerics are called in to examine you, to look for signs of impropriety. Yes, it gets that invasive. One bizarre historical fact. In the 14th century, Margaret of Hainaut, accused of infidelity, was subjected to a bizarre ritual where she had to walk barefoot and bareheaded to prove her innocence. The idea was that God would strike her down if she lied. Spoiler, he didn't. But that didn't mean her reputation was restored. The stain lingered even when the evidence didn't. And heaven help you if you get pregnant, because now the proof is undeniable, and your child is a threat to the whole noble line. If your lover is from a lower class, the baby could be seen as illegitimate, unfit to inherit, and yet still dangerous enough to provoke civil unrest. Some women were forced to take vows just to make the baby disappear. Others were quietly executed before they could give birth. Again, this isn't gothic fiction. This was real life for too many women whose only crime was following their hearts. The problem isn't just the punishment, it's the double standard. Men could be passionate, even reckless, and still get praised for it. Their affairs were seen as indulgences, sometimes even signs of virility. But for women, one misstep, and you're branded a harlot, a temptress, a disgrace. Love isn't just dangerous, it's a weapon that can be turned against you with brutal efficiency. Yet, despite it all, noble women found ways to love. Letters were hidden in sleeves. Tokens were sewn into hems. Secret codes were azed in embroidery. And sometimes they were bold. They made choices that risked everything from their status to their lives, because the hollow gilded cage of their marriages was simply too much. And even if their stories didn't survive in chronicles, they whispered their truths into the walls of their towers, into poems penned by heartbroken lovers, into lullabies sung to children who might never know their real fathers. There's a scholarly debate about just how much agency noble women really had. Some historians argue they were powerless, completely at the mercy of their husbands and families. Others suggest they were more politically savvy than we give them credit for. Masters of manipulation, alliance, and quiet rebellion. Maybe both are true. Maybe survival demanded both submission and strategy, depending on the moment. So now imagine air sitting in your solar pretending to sow, while your thoughts are 1,000 miles away. You think about that night who smiled at you in the garden. You think about what it would mean to reach for him. You know the risks. You've seen the punishments. But still, you dream. Because in a world where everything's decided for you, choosing who to love feels like the only decision that's actually yours. And so you lean a little closer when he walks by. You accept the lily on your windowsill. You risk it all for a flicker of connection in a cold, calculated world. Because love isn't safe here. It never was. But sometimes it's the only thing that feels real. You're at a harvest fair, and the music is playing. A lilting pipe and a drum. The kind that makes feet tap before heads can object. The fields have been kind this season, and there's bread, cheese, and a little wine. For just a moment, life feels easy, but then you see it. A boy from the next village, shirt loose, hair a bit too long, grinning like he doesn't care what he's supposed to be, and suddenly your world shifts. Problem is, you're the daughter of a reeve, he's a tanner's apprentice. And in the Middle Ages, falling in love across class lines is more than just awkward. It's dangerous. The rules are clear, even if they're not written down in any single book. You marry within your station. Peasants marry peasants. Merchants marry merchants. Nobles marry nobles. The boundaries are as fixed as the hedge, and just as sharp if you try to cross them. Because while the Middle Ages might seem rigid from a modern view, they were actually deeply obsessed with order, divine, social, and laid everyone in their place like stones in a carefully built wall. And if one of those stones shifts, say for love, the whole structure could be threatened. You might not be a princess, but you're still spoken for. Your father's arranged for you to marry a miller's son next spring. He has decent hands, a cow, and enough grain to keep you warm through winter, but he's not him. The tanner's boy. He makes YOLO in a way that's rare in this hard, heavy world. He talks about the stars, asks you if you've ever seen a heron's nest. He's trouble, and you know it. If your father finds out you're spending time with someone below your intended rank, he'll lose his mind. Not because he's cruel, though he might be, but because your marriage has implications. Dues, alliances, family reputation. Your currency. Whether you feel like it or not, love messes up the exchange rate. Now, imagine you're on the other side of that line. You're a squire, young, ambitious, dirt under your nails, but stars in your eyes. And the girl you like, she's the daughter of a baron. You piss her in the stable sometimes. She smells like jasmine and parchment. She smiles like she's trying not to smile. And for a second, you believe the ballads that maybe love can rise above your place. But here's the harsh reality. Your feelings aren't charming. They're threatening. If anyone finds out you're not the underdog in a love story, you're a liability. And nobody with dreams above his station. And trust me, that doesn't end with a wedding. It ends with you missing some teeth or a tongue, or simply disappearing into the wood's end, never coming back. One actual historical case. Let's talk about Agneshoto, a noblewoman in the 14th century England, who disguised herself as a man to fight in a duel in her father's place. Yes, that happened. And it wasn't just about honor. It was about preserving her family's standing. But rumors swirled that she did it for love. Whether that's true or not, it shows how tangled love, class, and reputation cold become. One wrong move, and your family's name was mud for generations. And speaking of fringe facts, here's a weird one. In some towns, if a lower-assman got caught pursuing a noblewoman, he could be forced to parade through the streets wearing donkey ears, and a collarto publicly mark his presumption. People would throw things, chant things. It wasn't just punishment. It was humiliation, designed to crush hope at its root. That's the danger of cross-class romance in the Middle Ages. It's not just about two people. It's about property, legacy, bloodlines, and when the stakes are that high, love becomes treasonous, especially if a child is involved. Illegitimate children weren't just personal shame, they were political problems. If a noblewoman had a child with a commoner, it could cause over inheritance, land rights, even fealty to the crown. And yet it still happened a lot more than the official records suggest, because people are people, no matter the century. And even in a world built on walls, some hearts went climbing. You had runaway marriages, secret ceremonies, and lovers who fled into the forest to start over as outlaws. Romantic, sure, but survival rates weren't great. Those woods didn't just have wolves, they had sheriffs. There's still debate among historians about how rigid these class rules really were. Some scholars argue that the boundaries were more flexible. In practice, especially during times of social upheaval, like after the Black Death, when labor shortages gave peasants more leverage. Others say that's wishful thinking, and that class divisions remained firmly entrenched until much later. Maybe both are true. Maybe it all depended on who you were, how rich your father was, and how many people were willing to look the other way. So you sit with your feelings, head down, trying not to meet their eyes. You carry your water, you pluck your herbs, you pretend not to look toward the path that leads past the tannery. But at night, when the village sleeps and the fire crackles, lo, you let yourself think about what might have been, what could still be, and that small flickering ember of love. It keeps you warm even when the world says you're wrong. 'Cause maybe the danger is exactly what makes it feel so real. You're sitting under an olive tree, the air thick with late summer dust and the scent of crushed rosemary. A soft melody drifts over the vineyard wall. Someone strumming a lute, half singing, half mourning. The voice doesn't belong to a courtier or a priest. It's a troubadour, one of the most romantically reckless creatures the Middle Ages ever produced. And you're trying not to listen too closely, but every verse of that song feels like it was written for you. Maybe it was. This is southern France. Circa the 12th century, the birthplace of courtly love's most dramatic PR campaign. Here treaters and troubadours travel, from court to court, singing about love, as if it were the most sacred, most devastating thing in Their verses are rich with longing, coded glances, and poetic despair. But don't get it twisted. These aren't just songs for entertainment. They're social grenades lobbed into courts, where real people live under very real rules. You're a noble woman in a chilly stone hall. Your husband is out hunting again. You sit through another dull meal of barley and boiled meat, half listening to your steward drone about taxes. Anton the troubadour steps forward. He sings not of battles or saints, but of you. Not by name, never by name. Butavarian knows who he means. The shape of your face, the color of your gown, the way your laughter breaks the silence of the courtyard. It's all there, delicately wrapped in metaphor and melody. And suddenly, the air in Thale changes. Some pretend not to notice, others exchange glances. A few smirk, your cheeks burn, but your heart races. You know what this is. It's a risk. Because in this world, songs aren't safe. Especially not love songs. Treaters were both artists and agitators. Their words could elevate or destroy, depending on who was listening. In many ways, they were the TikTok influences of the medieval world. Flamboyant, passionate, and perpetually just a few rhymes away from disaster. And if they directed their lyrics at someone important, especially a married woman, it could end in exile, mutilation, or even death. All for a poem. One famous example, the troubadour Guile de Cavistan, who fell for his lord's wife. He was discovered, killed, and according to one particularly gruesome version of the story, his heart was cooked and served to the lady in a stew. When she found out, she threw herself from a tower. That's love in the Middle Ages. Poetic, passionate, and deeply unappetizing. But here's the kicker. These songs weren't always real. Sometimes, they were entirely fictional, designed to gain favor or stir gossip. A troubadour might pretend, to pine for a high-born lady just to make a name for himself. But that didn't matter. Perception weighs reviving. If a song made someone look compromised, it was compromising. Your virtue could be torn apart by a clever chorus and a few well-placed metaphors. There was also a belief, a very medieval, very awkward one, that these songs could inspire ennobling love, that is by being adored from afar. A woman could inspire a man to become braver, wiser, more virtuous. Sounds romantic, right? Except it still reduces her to a symbol, not a person. You weren't expected to respond or reciprocate. You were a muse, not a partner. And if you dared to answer those verses with affection, well, now you're no longer inspirational. You're just inappropriate. Let's not forget how these performances could also backfire for the performers themselves. Treaters weren't usually rich. They relied on patronage, basically getting paid binables to entertain and flatter. That meant their lives were precarious. One bad song, one offended lord, and you're out on the road again, hoping someone in the next castle likes your metaphors about hawks and heartbreak. Some fringe scholars believe that certain love songs were actually used to pass secret messages, romantic espionage, if you will, hidden meanings tucked into verses, coded instructions for illicit affairs, or even rebellion sishized as odds. Did this really happen? Maybe, maybe not. But the fact that people thought it could is telling. Words had weight, especially in a society where so many other forms of communication were controlled. And then there's the question that still divides historians. How seriously did people take these songs? Were they just medieval soap operas, or did they genuinely shape real-life emotions and decisions? Some argue that the Truada tradition actually influenced how people felt about love, that it introduced a new kind of emotional vocabulary. Others say it was all theater, a noble pasty method rarely translated into real passion. But when you read the letters, the poems, the stories that followed, you start to wonder, because despite the danger, people did respond. They took the risk. Noble women wrote back. Young knights scribbled verses in the margins of prayer books. Secret meetings were arranged under moonlit archways. The songs may have started the fire, but real people kept it burning. So, Harrow again, heart-pounding, trying to look indifferent while the troubadour sings. You know the rules. You know this isn't safe, but you also know he means you. His words dance across the notes like fingertips, across your spine. And even if nothing ever happens, even if no touch, no kiss, no whispered promise ever follows, this feeling, it's more than enough to make you forget the cold stones and cold dinners, and colder marriages, even if just for a moment. Because in the Middle Ages, love songs weren't background music, they were sparks. And sometimes those sparks lit bonfires that no one could put out. You're kneeling by the fire, rolling parchment between your fingers, heart thudding in your throat. It's just ink, just words. But this love letter could get you imprisoned, or, worse, you've spent 3 nights drafting it, rewriting the phrasing over and over, hiding the pages under a floor till the very time someone knocked. It's not even a long letter, but each sentence feels like you're walking a tightrope, blindfolded with a torch in your hand. Because in the Middle Ages, writing down your feelings could be the most dangerous move of all. Letters were lifelines. In a world where you couldn't just stroll up and whisper sweet nothings without risking a scandal, ink and parchment became your weapon and shield. Love letters were everywhere, between nobles, between clergy, even between married women and their forbidden favorites. But what started a soft poetry or careful prose could easily become evidence. Because once your words were out there, you couldn't call them back. You send the letter anyway, folded tightly, sealed with wax, pressed with crest of your family's ring. You slip it to a trusted servant who's been with your household long enough to know and not to ask questions. You tell yourself the risk is worth it, that the person waiting on the other end, waiting in a cold stone chamber, maybe, or behind a locked chapel door, will understand that they'll read your words and feel as terrified and thrilled as you do. What you don't know is that half the castle already suspects something, that the steward saw the servant's nervous gait, that one of your ladies-in-waiting noticed your distracted sighs, your sudden interest in calligraphy, and that's all it takes. The letter doesn't even have to reach its destination. If someone finds it mid-transit, if it's intercepted or simply misplaced, it can be used against you. It's your confession, your signature in blood. You might as well have stood on a table and shouted, "I'm in love." One notorious example, in the late 13th century. The Countess of Salisbury was rumored to have exchanged romantic letters with a knight who wasn't her husband. It's not clear whether the letters were ever made public, but her name became tangled in court gossip, and the knight's career mysteriously stalled. Coincidence? Maybe. But in that kind of world, accusations didn't need proof. Just a little ink, and some imagination. Hearest's thing. In a time before privacy, as we know it, letters weren't protected. There was no guarantee that only the intended reader would ever see your words. They could be read aloud, handed round at court, or kept in a chest as ammunition for a future power play. And since handwriting was often recognizable, even anonymous notes could be traced. Your pen stroke, your choice of phrases, even your spelling quirks, all of it could betray you. Still, people wrote, because how else could they love? You couldn't declare your feelings in public. You couldn't hold hands in the garden without 20 eyes watching. But a letter that was a whisper that could cross locked doors, a touch in the dark, something deeply personal in a world where almost nothing was. Some letters were carefully coded. People developed ciphers, used obscure classical references, even wrote in foreign languages to keep their meaning hidden. In a few cases, lovers used religious metaphors to mask their intentions, comparing their beloved to saints, or disguising desire as spiritual admiration. That way, if caught, they could claim piety instead of passion. Clever, right? Except it didn't always work. There's a quirky history. In 14th century Florence, a nun named Sister Benedetta was found to have exchanged highly emotional and intimate letters with another woman in the convent. The language was ambiguous, devotional, yes, but also undeniably romantic. The church authorities weren't fooled. Benedetta was put on trial and later forced into silence. Her letters were preserved as part of the evidence, a permanent record of what she was never supposed to feel. And that's the terrifying part. Once your feelings were in writing, they didn't belong to you. They belonged to whoever had the power to read them aloud in court, to twist them, to strip them of meaning, and turn them into something ugly, something sinful, something punishable. Still, historians debate how widespread this fear really was. Some argue that love letters were so common that they became an accepted part of noble flirtation. Dangerous, yes, but not rare. Others belly that many letters were burned or hidden before they could ever be found, which is why we have so few surviving examples. Maybe both are true. Maybe every letter that's been lost was someone's desperate attempt to rewrite their own ending. You sit now, staring at the hearth. The servant hasn't returned. Your letter is somewhere out in the world, and there's no way to know who's reading it. You imagine the one you love unfolding it, scanning the lines with a smile, or worse, being interrogated with it in hand, your words turned into chains. There's nothing you can do but wait. And if you're the one receiving a letter, you read it like it's a flame. Slowly, reverently, scared that's a man will walk in and see your face shift. You memorize every line, because you know you'll have to burn it before dawn. But for now, in the glow of a flickering candle, you let yourself believe in it, in the voice, behind the ink, in the person who took the risk for you. Because that's what love looked like in the Middle Ages. Paper, ink, danger. You wrote not because it was safe, but because it was the only way to say what you weren't allowed to say out loud. And for some, those letters were the closest thing to freedom they'd ever taste. You're ducking beneath a tapestry-lined corridor, trying to make yourself. Your boots barely whisper against the flagstones, but inside your heart's thudding like war drums. Someone saw you earlier just for a moment. You were laughing, not with your husband, not with your kin, but with Sumi Niels. A spark, a glance, a little too much warmth. And now the whispers have started. You feel it, the danger curling around you like smoke. Because in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just love that could kill you. It was jealousy. And jealousy didn't come quietly in this world. It came with swords, with slander, with arsenic stirred into your. Love may have been risky, but being suspected of love could be just as lethal, especially when reputations, land, and egos were involved. Imagine you are a knight just back from campaign. Your lord greets you, but his gaze lingers too long on his wife. She offers you wine, maybe smiles with that unspoken familiarity, and suddenly there's a shift, a coldness in the room. The lord begins to ask questions with the edge of his voice. He watches you at supper. He keeps track of who you talk to and how long you linger in the stables. You're not guilty of anything yet, but in a place where honor is everything, and masculinity is constantly measured by how well a man keeps his. Woman, suspicion is more than if. Jealousy in the Middle Ages wasn't just a personal emotion. It was a public crisis. A man whose wife was rumored to be unfaithful could suffer political embarrassment, social disgrace, and even lose allies. Entire family lines could be discredited over the implication that a child wasn't legitimate. And if you think people took that lightly, think again. One historical account tells of a nobleman in the 13th century. Aquitaine publicly challenged his wife's suspected lover to a judicial duel. The outcome, the accused man, was killed. His body left to rot outside the castle gates as a warning to others. The lady in question was sent to a convent where she remained for the rest of her life. Was there any proof of an affair? Number, but proof wasn't necessary. Jealousy was enough to get the blood flowing. And women, oh, they weren't immune to jealousy either, but they had far fewer options. A noblewoman couldn't challenge a rival to a duel, but she could spread rumors, manipulate allies, or appeal to the church. Accusations of seduction, witchcraft, or unchaste behavior were powerful tools, especially when directed at women of lower status. Servants, handmaidens, even nuns weren't safe from a lady's wrath if she felt threatened, and sometimes jealousy turned domestic. Behind the thick walls of a manor, a husband could accuse his wife of infidelity and punish her as he saw fit. In many places, a nobleman was allowed to discipline his wife physically, even lock her away with little interference. Love could make you reckless, but jealousy made people cruel. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. There was actually a medieval Persian that you could ward off infidelity by feeding your partner a stew containing the powdered bones of a faithful spouse. Yes, you read that right. Ground up bones, love potions, sure. But this was culinary. Jealousy with a dark flair. Apparently, the dead were more trustworthy. Things got even messier when children entered the picture. The moment a noble woman gave birth, people started doing the math. Was this child truly the heir? Did he resemble the father, or that suspiciously charming squire who delivered her messages? It wasn't just family drama. It was succession, wealth, dynastic security. And if enough people questioned it, the child could be disinherited, cast aside. Or if you're really unlucky, quietly disposed of. Even the church got in on the paranoia. Priests were often the recipients of jealous confessions, sobbing admissions, or frantic attempts to prove innocence. Some monasteries kept written records of these cases, not always with names, but with enough detail to piece together the social chaos jealousy could unleash. You might think of the church as a neutral mediator, but it wasn't always so clean. Priests had their own loyalties. They too could be swayed by influence, bribes, or gossip. And then, of course, there were love triangles. Because humans, being humans, someone was always falling for someone who was already spoken for. Entire ballads were written about these entanglements, usually ending in heartbreak, battle, or exile. And while the stories often romanticized the passion, they never hid the cost. A single jealous rival could end not just a relationship, but a life. There's a major debate among historians about how these emotional outbursts were aerially perceived. Were they seen as noble defenses of honor, or shameful lapses of self-control? Some say that jealousy, particularly male jealousy, was glorified, evidence of virility and pride. Others argue it was a dangerous whackness, a fault that could make rulers look unstable or tyrannical. Perhaps it was both, depending on who was jealous and who ended up winning. So now you sit, heart still pounding, wondering if that harmless moment of laughter has sealed your fate. You didn't mean anything by it, but the look in your husband's eye is different tonight. The tension at the table is thick enough to slice. Maybe nothing will happen. Maybe this, like so many things, will fade by morning, but maybe not. You think of the woman who was dragged from her bed by her jealous husband, of the knight who lost his tang for writing a poem to the wrong lady. You think of the whispering maids, the shifting alliances, the poisoned jealousies, and you remember what everyone eventually learns in this world. Love is dangerous, but jealousy is an executioner, with a very long memory. It's a gray morning, thickened that seeps into your bones before you've even left your bed. Rain taps the stone windowsill like a soft warning. Outside the monastery bells ring low and slow. 1, 2, 3 times. That means morning prayer. But for a few unlucky souls inside these walls, it also means another day of hiding something that doesn't fit into a vow of chastity. Because tonight we're slipping behind the sacred silence and stepping gento, a place where love, even in its quietest form, could cost you everything. Welcome to Scandal and Theme and Astery. You're not wearing silk or velvet here. You're in rough wool, the kind that never stops itching. You sleep in straw, you rise before dawn. You speak only when permitted, but you feel, oh, you still feel. And despite all the rules, the prayers, the ritualistic repetition of surrendering the body and soul to God, human longing does not go quietly. Not in nunneries, not in abbeys, not in any stone sanctum where people try to pray the heat out of their blood. Picture yourself as a young monk, freshly taunted, newly cloaked, and very much committed to a life of piety, or at least, that's what you told everyone. But Brother Thomas, the way he reads Latin, like the words themselves, are honey. The way he looks at you across the scripture table, you try not to notice. You try not to feel the flush creep up your neck. But he touches your hand, one afternoon just for a second too long, and now you can't unfeel it. And that's the beginning of the end. Because monastic life isn't just about devotion, it's about surveillance. Everything is done in groups. Meals in silence, prayers in formation, sleep in shared quarters. You're never alone. Not really. Which means if something happens, anything, it's going to be. And once suspicion is born, it grows fast, like mold on damp stone. For nuns, it could be even worse. Convents were meant to be sanctuaries from the sin of the world. Many women were sent there not by choice, but by family arrangement. Too many daughters, not enough dowies, or a little too much curiosity about the stable boy. Once behind the walls, they were expected to live in stillness and obedience. But the heart doesn't care about vows or veils. Sometimes it blooms anyway, finding warmth in a smile at morning mass, or fingers brushing in the herb garden. And when it did, the consequences were brutal. If two nuns were discovered in aromantic entanglement, they could be forcibly separated, publicly humiliated, or even excommunicated. Some were locked in cells for years, denied communion, denied visitors, denied light. If a monk was caught in a relationship, especially with a woman, he could be defrocked and expelled, Ife was very unlucky, and the scandal went public. He might face a secular trial, branding, or worse. One infamous case involved the OPS of the convent of St. Marie in the 14th century. Rumors spread that she had developed an inappropriate fondness for a novice under her care. The bishop got involved. A formal inquest was launched. Seized witnesses were interviewed. The conclusion: the abbess was stripped of her title and quietly reassigned to Ermote, crumbling abbey far from any town. The novice disappeared from their courts entirely. It's not clear what happened to her, but silence is often louder than ink. But here's a twist. Sometimes the church covered up these affairs, not out of mercy, but out of pragmatism. Public scandals made the institution look bad. So if two monks were caught in a moment of passion, they might be shipped off quietly to different orders, and the incident would vanish. If a nun gave birth, a horrifyingly common occurrence in some convents, the baby was sometimes whisked away, and either killed or raised as an orphan. There were whispers of secret tunnels, hidden chambers, and midnight escapes arranged by sympathetic confessors. Love didn't just survive in these places, it carved itself out in shadows. Now, for a fringe fact that feels too dramatic to be true. In some cloisters, locks were placed inside the cells, not to keep others out, but to keep nuns from sneaking off during the night. Apparently, the temptation to climb over the convent walls or rendezvous in the gardens was strong enough to warrant architectural modifications. How romantic is that? Your passion was considered such a threat it had to be physically contained. And yet, letters still passed hands. Glances still lingered. Psalms were sung with trembling lips. Even the most devout found themselves pulled into the gravity of forbidden love. Because when everything in your world is structuretto, deny you emotionally contact, the smallest moments become monumental. A shared candle, a whispered confession, a touch that lingers during the passing off the wine cup. Modern scholars argue about the prevalence of these affairs. Were they rare deviations, or quiet norms kept out of sight? Some claim the monasteries were stricter than a prison. Others suggest that emotional intimacy was so deeply human it became inevitable, and that the church simply turned a blind eye unless forced to act. It's hard to know. So many of the stories were erased, but what survives in letters, testimonies, and a few scandalized papal bulls paints a picture that's far more tangled than the official narrative. So here you are, caught in a life of silence, but feeling more than you know how to name. You try to pray it away, to bury it in parchment and psalms. But when the person next to you kneels just a little closer, when your fingers brush at the communion rail, it comes roaring back. The ache, the longing, the risk. Love wasn't supposed to follow you into sacred spaces, but it did. And once it found you, no amount of incense or chanting could drive it out. It's your wedding day. There's music, kind of a procession of grimmel-looking family members,